The hum of the air conditioning in the penthouse boardroom during an emergency call was usually a soothing drone, a white noise against the city's incessant thrum. Today, it felt like a buzzing fuse, shorting out my concentration. I traced the polished grain of the mahogany table, a gesture of contained impatience. My phone, a silent sentinel, vibrated with a message I'd been half expecting, half dreading. A single word from the chief investigator. Go. I pushed back from the table, the swivel chair groaning in protest. Across from me, the city councilman, a man whose tailored suit seemed to chafe against his discomfort, cleared his throat. Seth, are you certain this is necessary? The preliminary report? It's quite clear, an accident. My gaze, sharp and unwavering, met his. Preliminary reports often are, councilman, but clarity is a luxury the deceased rarely afford us. My voice, usually calm, held an edge I didn't bother to soften. I was Seth, a forensic anthropologist, and my expertise lay not in the neat conclusions, but in the inconvenient truths etched onto bone and earth. I had built my reputation on finding the stories the dead couldn't tell, often in the face of official narratives. This determination was a part of me, a deep-seated drive to see the world as it truly was, not as others wished it to be. The chief investigator, a woman whose stoicism was legendary, nodded almost imperceptibly from her end of the conference table. She knew me. She knew my methods. More importantly, she knew when to trust the gut feeling that often preceded my detailed analyses. Blackwood Manor, Seth, Dr. Alistair Finch. Apparent fall from the east turret. Alistair Finch. The name resonated. A celebrated historian, an authority on pre-colonial North American settlements, and a notoriously private man who had inherited Blackwood Manor, a sprawling estate steeped in a local legend. Its foundations were rumored to sit atop an ancient indigenous burial ground, and its walls whispered tales of Revolutionary War skirmishes. Finch had spent decades restoring it, transforming it into a private museum of sorts, a repository for his vast collection of historical artifacts. The thought of him falling from its iconic turret. It didn't sit right. Access codes will be sent to your device, the chief investigator continued, her voice devoid of emotion. Local authorities are already on site. They've secured the scene. Secured or compromised, I murmured, more to myself than to them. The nuances of scene preservation were often lost on those without a specific eye for the minute. Every misplaced footprint, every disturbed pebble, was a word erased from the narrative I painstakingly reconstructed. Within the hour, I was in my vehicle, navigating the winding, tree-lined roads that led out of the city and into the ancestral lands of Blackwood Manor. The air grew cooler, heavier, carrying the scent of damp earth and ancient foliage. The estate itself was a monument to time, its stone walls weathered by centuries, its gables sharp against the bruised purple of the horizon. As I approached, the flashing blue and red lights of emergency vehicles pulsed like an erratic heartbeat against the deepening twilight. A uniformed officer waved me through the ornate iron gates, which stood ajar. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires, leading me past manicured lawns and towering oak trees that seemed to watch with silent judgment. The main house loomed, a Gothic silhouette against the fading light. Its east turret, the site of the alleged fall, stood like a broken finger pointing accusingly at the sky. I parked alongside a cluster of official vehicles. The air was still, save for the distant chirping of crickets and the hushed voices of the responders. A local detective, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually rumpled suit, met me at the base of the turret. He extended a hand, his grip firm. "Detective Miller, glad you're here, Seth. It's a messy one." "Tell me what you have," I said, pulling on a pair of nitrile gloves, the thin material a second skin. My kit bag, heavy with tools and evidence containers, was already slung over my shoulder. Dr. Finch was found at the base of the turret. Housekeeper discovered him this morning. Appears he fell sometime overnight. Single-story fall, maybe 20 feet, Head trauma, clearly. No signs of forced entry. Everything points to a tragic accident. He gestured vaguely towards the stone wall. He was known to take his evening brandy up there. Enjoy the view. I surveyed the scene. The ground around the base of the turret was cordoned off with yellow tape, creating a sterile bubble around the deceased. Finch's body lay partially obscured by a white sheet, a grim mound on the damp earth. The detective's summary was concise, logical, and utterly unsatisfying. My eyes, trained to dissect the minutiae, immediately began their work. The soil directly beneath the presumed impact point was disturbed, as expected. But beyond the immediate area, where the trajectory of a simple fall might have scattered debris, I noticed something subtle. A cluster of small, almost imperceptible indentations in the soft earth, leading away from the body, not towards it. They were too shallow for footprints, too uniform for random debris. My brow furrowed. I walked the perimeter of the taped-off area, my gaze sweeping the ground, then the turret wall itself. The stone was ancient, weathered. A thin layer of moss clung to its crags. But near the top, just below the parapet, a section of the moss appeared freshly disturbed, almost scraped away. And directly beneath it, clinging to a minute crack in the stone, was a faint, almost invisible smear. Not blood, not yet. Something else. My internal alarm bells, usually a symphony of subtle notes, began to ring with a singular, insistent clang. An accidental fall might dislodge moss, yes, but that particular smear, at that particular height, coupled with those peculiar indentations on the ground, it didn't align with a simple, gravity-driven event. The detective was still explaining the layout of the manor, the routine of the staff. I barely registered his words. My focus was on the smear, the indentations, the story they weren't telling. This wasn't just a fall. This was a narrative being carefully constructed, and my job was to dismantle it, piece by painstaking piece, until the true story emerged from the fragments. The tension in the air was no longer just the emergency call. It was the silent pressure of a secret waiting to be unearthed. The cool, damp air clung to the ancient stones of the manor, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and something metallic, something that always accompanied death. The detective, a burly figure with a perpetually furrowed brow, stepped back, giving me space. The crime scene technicians, quiet and efficient, moved like shadows around the perimeter, their flashlights cutting arcs through the morning gloom. I knelt beside the deceased, the white sheet a stark, unnatural blanket against the brown soil. "All right," I murmured, more to myself than to the silent observers. "Let's see what we have." I peeled back the sheet, revealing the historian's face. It was a mask of impact and disfigurement, but even through the trauma, I could discern the familiar features from the photographs I'd reviewed. My eyes swept over the body, noting the precise angle of the limbs, the way the torso had twisted on impact. The official report cited a fall from the turret, a tragic accident. My gut told me otherwise, and my gut rarely lied. My gloved hands began their methodical work. I started with the cranium, feeling for depressions, fractures, the telltale give of compromised bone. The impact had been severe, no question, consistent with a significant fall. But as my fingers traced the mandible, I felt a subtle, almost imperceptible displacement. Not a clean break, but a series of minute, almost hairline fractures radiating from a specific point along the jawline. Fractures that suggested a sharp, localized force, not the broad, diffuse trauma of hitting the ground after a long drop. This was a detail that gnawed at me. A fall might cause it, but the pattern was specific. Too specific. I moved down the torso, checking the ribs, the sternum. Again, multiple fractures, as expected. But on the left clavicle, close to the shoulder, another anomaly. A small, splintered break, almost a chip, inconsistent with the general crushing force of the fall. This felt more like a direct, focused strike, perhaps with a narrow object, before the fall, or even during the initial moments of being propelled. My internal alarm bells began to clang. Next, the clothing. The tweed jacket, now torn and soiled, held a story. I carefully ran my fingers over the fabric, paying close attention to the shoulders, the sleeves, the collar. The texture felt gritty in places, not just from the damp soil. I pulled out my magnifying loupe, adjusting the focus. Tiny, iridescent flecks glittered under the lens. They were microscopic, almost like fine dust, but with a crystalline structure. Not typical soil, not local stone. The manor's ancient walls were limestone, the earth clay. These flecks were a distinct pale green, almost translucent, catching the light with a peculiar shimmer. I carefully collected a sample onto a sterile slide, my mind racing. I'd seen similar mineral compositions before, in contexts far removed from this quiet English estate. They were characteristic of certain deep earth geological formations, often associated with specific types of ore deposits. This was not something found in the manicured gardens or the rolling hills of the surrounding countryside. This was alien to the scene. My suspicion solidified into a cold, hard certainty. This was no tragic fall. The microscopic bone fractures, the localized impact points, and now this unique mineral dust. It all pointed to a struggle, a confrontation, and a deliberate act. Someone had handled the historian, perhaps struck him, and then orchestrated this fall to look like an accident. What was so important that it warranted such an elaborate deception? And what was this dust? The display showed an unrecognized number, but the urgency of the buzz suggested it wasn't a wrong number. I hesitated, my gaze lingering on the shimmering green dust on the historian's jacket. This could not wait. "Excuse me," I said to the nearest technician, indicating the body. "Maintain the perimeter. No further disturbance until I return." I answered the call, the voice on the other end clipped and devoid of pleasantries. "Seth, you're needed, immediately. Penthouse boardroom, now." No explanation, no context, just a command. My jaw tightened. This was far from typical protocol. To be pulled from an active scene, especially one I was just beginning to unravel, spoke volumes about the forces at play. I knew then that my initial findings, however preliminary, had already stirred a hornet's nest. The drive was a blur of winding country roads giving way to the bustling arteries of the city. My thoughts were a whirlwind of bone fragments, mineral dust, and the unsettling implications of a prominent historian's accidental death. The manor, with its secrets and its silent victim, felt miles away, yet intrinsically linked to whatever awaited me. The air was thick with unspoken tension. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the room, surrounded by a handful of grim-faced individuals. To his right, a stern-faced security chief, eyes like chips of flint. A legal counsel, looking thoroughly uncomfortable, occupied another seat. No one offered a greeting. The silence was heavy, expectant. My presence was not a request. It was a summons. "Seth," the official began, his voice low, carrying an unmistakable edge. "We need to discuss your observations at the estate." His gaze, sharp and unwavering, cut straight through me. Specifically, anything that might deviate from the initial assessment. My hand instinctively went to the small, sterile slide holding the mineral dust, still tucked securely in my vest pocket. The game, I realized, had just begun. The city lights blurred into streaks of amber and ruby below, a vibrant tapestry that felt utterly disconnected from the cold, ancient stones I'd left behind. My fingers still traced the outline of the small, sterile slide in my vest pocket, the mineral dust within it a silent accusation. The game, as I'd realized just hours ago, had indeed begun, and I was holding the first piece of evidence. "Seth, we need an update." The lead investigator's voice cut through the hum of the room, crisp and impatient. He sat at the polished obsidian table, flanked by several other figures, their faces etched with varying degrees of skepticism and concern. I turned, pulling the slide from my pocket. The fall was staged. The impact trajectory, the displaced masonry. They don't align with a simple accident. And this. I held up the slide, the minuscule flecks glinting under the recessed lights. I found this mineral dust on the victim's clothing, specifically in the creases of his jacket where it wouldn't have been disturbed by the fall itself. It's not local to the estate, nor is it common. I need a full spectrographic analysis immediately. A senior analyst, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, reached for the slide. You're suggesting premeditation, Seth? His tone was cautious. His gaze was direct. I'm suggesting we look beyond the obvious, I countered, my voice steady despite the rapid-fire calculations in my head. This dust could be a signature, a trace element from the true scene of the crime, a critical link to someone or somewhere else entirely. The lead investigator leaned forward, his expression hardening. This is a high-profile case, Seth. We're talking about a renowned historian, a national treasure. The official narrative is already being shaped. Then we reshape it with facts, I said, meeting his gaze. The facts are in this dust. Get it analyzed, fast. Prioritize it over everything else. The senior analyst nodded, already moving towards the door, the slide clutched carefully. The lead investigator watched him leave, then turned back to me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. You have a hunch, Seth. Don't let it lead us down a rabbit hole. It's more than a hunch, I assured him, though I knew that until the analysis returned. My mind replayed the scene at the estate, cataloging every misplaced stone, every peculiar detail that had snagged my forensic intuition. I considered Dr. Finally. The senior analyst returned, her face grim. He placed a report on the table. You were right, Seth. The mineral dust is a specific form of cinnabar, mixed with trace elements of galena and sphalerite. It's rare. The geological signature points to a very particular region, known for its ancient mining activity. And more specifically, to an unsanctioned archaeological dig site in the remote highlands, one that's been under the radar for years. My pulse quickened. Unsanctioned? Why? It's a site believed to hold artifacts from a pre-dynastic civilization, but it's protected by indigenous land claims and is highly unstable. No legitimate organization would touch it without extensive, years-long negotiations and safety protocols. Yet there's evidence of recent clandestine activity there. My thoughts immediately jumped to Finch. This was exactly the kind of obscure, historically significant, and potentially dangerous site that would have captivated his singular focus. Was Dr. Finch connected to this site? His recent research proposals, the ones that were consistently rejected for ethical and safety reasons, frequently referenced that region, the senior analyst confirmed. He became quite obsessed with it in the last few months. The pieces began to click into place, forming a disturbing mosaic. The accident at the estate, the anachronistic dust, the secret dig site, all pointing to a deliberate act, to Finch's deep involvement in something far more perilous than academic rivalry. I need to go there, I stated, pushing away from the table. And I need to talk to Finch's research assistant, the one who abruptly left his employ a few weeks ago. The journey to the highlands was long, a slow ascent from the concrete jungle into a landscape of rugged peaks and dense ancient forests. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to little more than faint tracks carved into the earth. The air grew thinner, sharper, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I felt the weight of civilization fall away, replaced by an increasing sense of isolation and anticipation. The world was narrowing, focusing on a single remote point. I found the estranged research assistant in a small, weathered cabin nestled at the edge of a deep ravine, surrounded by an overgrown garden. The assistant was a young woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to have taken root deep within her. He was startled to see me, her hands trembling as she offered me a mug of herbal tea. "I'm here about Dr. Finch," I began, my voice calm, observational. "And the site in the Highlands." Her gaze darted away, fixed on a point beyond my shoulder. I pressed gently, my eyes never leaving her face. "He was there, wasn't he? Recently." A tremor ran through her. She hugged herself, her shoulders hunched. "He was different, obsessed. He wouldn't listen to reason. Said he was on the verge of the greatest discovery in centuries. A lost artifact, he called it. Something that would rewrite history. And these hushed meetings you mentioned in your resignation letter," I continued, recalling a vague detail from Finch's personnel file. "Who was he meeting with?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know their names. They were imposing. Always late at night. Codes, dates, specific locations. Finch always seemed more agitated after they left. More driven, but also more afraid." "Afraid of what?" I prompted, leaning forward slightly. "Afraid of what they would do if he didn't deliver the artifact. I had to get away. It wasn't just about an artifact anymore. The game, it seemed, was far more dangerous than I had initially imagined." The air conditioning hummed, a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. My hands, usually steady, gripped the edge of the polished mahogany table. Across from me, the chief investigator, his face tight with a weariness that looked more like irritation, gestured dismissively at a stack of reports. "Seth, we're being leaned on," he stated, his voice low but firm. "Upper brass, the mayor's office, even a few calls from the Capitol. This historian, he was a big name. They want this wrapped. A tragic accident, case closed. The pressure is immense." I met his gaze, refusing to flinch. Tragic, perhaps. But an accident? My initial findings suggest otherwise. The historian's body, the unusual fracture patterns, the discrepancies at the scene. They don't align with a simple fall. My voice was calm, a deliberate counterpoint to his barely contained frustration. And the information I received from the historian's colleague, running a hand over his thinning hair. "I understand your meticulousness, Seth. I truly do. But we have a witness, a clear scene. The fall was substantial. What exactly are you chasing? Ghosts?" "I'm chasing truth," I countered, my resolve hardening. "And right now, the truth points to manipulation, not misfortune. I need more time at the dig site. There's a missing piece, I can feel it." The silence stretched, thick with unspoken demands. He eventually gave a curt nod, a concession born more of exhaustion than agreement. "Fine, but make it quick. My leash is getting shorter by the hour." I left the boardroom with a knot in my stomach, the weight of the political machine pressing down. Their urgency to close the case felt less about public relations and more about burying something. The journey to the dig site was a winding ascent into the hills, the paved road eventually giving way to a gravel track that rattled my vehicle. I parked near the perimeter, the engine ticking as it cooled. The site itself was a shallow depression, partially excavated, the exposed layers of soil a testament to centuries of human activity. Yellow crime scene tape, faded by the sun, still fluttered half-heartedly in the breeze. My boots crunched on loose pebbles as I approached, my eyes scanning for anything amiss. The site had been secured, but not meticulously protected. I noted faint, fresh boot prints near the edge of the excavation, distinct from my own, definitely not the typical tread of law enforcement. They were too precise, too recent. A small, discarded energy bar wrapper, its silver foil glinting, lay half-buried near a pile of excavated earth. It was a modern intrusion, out of place in this ancient setting. Someone had been here, recently, and not for legitimate archaeological purposes. I knelt, my forensic toolkit open beside me. The soil was loose in this section, recently disturbed, Not by the wind or rain, but by human hands. I sifted through the earth with gloved fingers, my gaze sharp, methodical. The historian had been obsessed with this specific area, convinced it held a secret. What had he found, or been on the verge of finding? Then my fingers brushed against something hard, smooth, yet distinctly textured. I carefully extracted it. It was a fragment, no larger than my thumb, of what appeared to be pottery. The color was a rich, deep red, almost maroon, with intricate black geometric patterns painted onto its surface. My breath caught. This wasn't local ware. This wasn't even from the known periods of habitation for this region. The style, the pigments, the firing. It spoke of a culture thousands of miles away from a completely different epoch. It was anachronistic, wildly so, and its presence here was impossible unless it had been deliberately placed, or perhaps deliberately removed from somewhere else and then lost. This small, unlikely shard was a solid piece of evidence. It confirmed my suspicions. The historian hadn't just fallen. He had stumbled upon something monumental, something worth killing for. I carefully secured the fragment in a sterile evidence bag, my mind racing. I pulled into the secure parking garage beneath my forensic lab, the familiar concrete walls a comforting return to order. Or so I thought. As I approached the lab entrance, a subtle disturbance caught my eye. My senses sharpened. I paused, listening. Silence. Too much silence. I drew my personal defense tool, a heavy-duty tactical flashlight, and carefully bypassed the compromised lock, pushing the door open a crack. The air inside was still, undisturbed by any recent activity. No alarms blared. I moved through the lab slowly, methodically, my flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. My workstations were pristine, my delicate instruments untouched. The evidence lockers, each containing sensitive materials from various cases, remained sealed. The meticulously organized shelves of reference texts and samples were undisturbed. Nothing was missing. Not a single file, not a piece of equipment, not even a stray paperclip. Yet the message was loud and clear. My desktop monitor was on, displaying only a blank screen, but the power button was glowing. I always shut it down completely before leaving. It wasn't from any local bird. It was sleek, almost obsidian, with an unnatural sheen. This wasn't a theft. This was a violation. A precise, calculated intrusion designed not to take, but to warn. Someone knew I was closing in. Someone knew what I was looking for, or at least that I was looking too deeply. The feather was a calling card, a silent promise of what could happen if I didn't back down. They had just confirmed my every suspicion. The game had just become deadly serious. The winding ascent into the hills had been a journey not just in distance, but in perspective. The paved road had eventually given way to a gravel track, then little more than a pair of muddy ruts leading deeper into the estate's sprawling, untamed acreage. The air grew colder, heavier, smelling of damp earth and ancient stone. The sprawling manor, a testament to centuries of silent witness, now felt less like a relic and more like a stage where a new, unsettling drama was unfolding. Inside Finch's study, the quiet hum of my portable analysis unit was the only sound. The room was a carefully preserved snapshot of the historian's life. Towering bookshelves crammed with texts, a heavy oak desk cluttered with papers, and the faint scent of old parchment and pipe tobacco. They wanted a quick resolution, a neat package tied with a tragic bow. But the details, as always, refused to conform. My focus narrowed on the pottery fragment. It was small, no larger than my thumb, its surface a dull, earthy red, adorned with a geometric pattern in faded black. I had retrieved it from beneath a dislodged floorboard near the edge of the terrace, a location that felt too deliberate to be accidental. I carefully placed the fragment under the stereo microscope. The magnification revealed a network of fine cracks, typical of aged pottery. But then, I adjusted the lighting, switching to ultraviolet. A subtle, almost imperceptible glow emerged from certain areas of the black pigment. This was the first red flag. Ancient organic pigments, while often containing trace elements that fluoresce, rarely did so with such uniform intensity. Next, I prepared a minute sample, just a few grains scraped from an inconspicuous edge, for spectrographic analysis. The machine whirred, a soft, high-pitched whine filling the silence. The readout flickered to life on the screen. My eyes scanned the data, looking for the telltale signatures of mineral composition. The silicate structure was generally correct, consistent with ancient clay, but the trace elements in the pigment. That was where the deception lay. There was a faint, yet undeniable presence of titanium dioxide, a compound not widely accessible as a pigment until the early 20th century. And the binding agent, a synthetic polymer, was a dead giveaway. I leaned back from the microscope, the chair groaning under my weight. This wasn't an ancient artifact. It was a sophisticated forgery, crafted with an astounding level of skill, designed to fool all but the most rigorous examination. The subtle anachronisms were almost arrogant in their placement, as if daring someone to find them. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Finch wasn't merely a historian researching ancient artifacts. This wasn't about a tragic fall. It was about a high-stakes forgery ring, trafficking in incredibly convincing fakes. And Finch, with his meticulous research and unparalleled knowledge, must have been on the verge of uncovering their operation. They weren't just protecting a reputation. They were protecting an entire illicit enterprise. A fresh wave of determination surged through me, eclipsing the earlier unease. My initial sweep of the study had been thorough, but now I had a new lens through which to view everything. Finch hadn't been an academic recluse. He had been an investigator, piecing together a puzzle far more intricate than I'd imagined. He would have left clues. I began again, slower this time, my hands brushing over every surface, every book spine. I tapped along the paneling, ran my fingers over the ornate carvings of the desk. The sheer volume of books was overwhelming, but I focused on the sections related to forgery detection, to illicit trade, to specific ancient civilizations known for their highly sought-after artifacts. My gaze drifted to a large, antique globe, its brass meridian tarnished with age. It sat on a custom-built pedestal, seemingly fixed in place. I remembered Finch's colleague mentioning his fascination with cartography. I ran my hand along the wooden base of the pedestal. Nothing. Then I noticed a slight discoloration in the grain, a hairline seam that didn't quite match the surrounding wood. It was almost invisible, meticulously disguised. I pressed gently along the seam. My breath hitched. Inside, nestled on a velvet lining, were two items. A slim, sealed data drive, its surface etched with what looked like an ancient symbol, and a rolled-up piece of parchment. My fingers trembled slightly as I unrolled the parchment. It wasn't a historical document, nor a conventional map. It was a coded map, without question, pointing to locations I couldn't yet decipher. I held the data drive in my palm. Encrypted files, a coded map. Finch hadn't just been close. He had been there. The tension in the room thickened, pressing in on me. This wasn't a simple case of a historian's accidental death. This was a direct challenge to a powerful hidden network. And now I was holding the evidence. It was the icy grip of encroaching danger. Fluorescent panels overhead cast a sterile, unforgiving light on the polished mahogany table, reflecting the frantic dance of data across the 3 monitors I'd commandeered. I'd left the sprawling estate with more than just soil samples and bone fragments. The anachronisms, much like those on the victim, were a deliberate signature. A challenge. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a practiced ballet of keystrokes and commands. The initial forensic image of the drives had taken hours, a painstaking process to ensure no data was corrupted or missed. Now the real work began. I toggled between a brute force decryption algorithm and a more nuanced linguistic analysis tool, trying to chip away at the layers of obfuscation. The coded map was proving particularly stubborn. Its symbols weren't a known cipher. They were a hybrid, seemingly drawn from obscure ancient scripts and modern cryptographic principles, woven together with a chilling artistry. A colleague, a digital forensics specialist who'd been pulled into this emergency, leaned over my shoulder, his breath a faint whisper against my ear. "Any luck, Seth?" the chief is asking. "Tell the chief I'm still breathing," I muttered, my gaze locked on the screen. The pressure was a physical weight, but it only sharpened my focus. The map glowed on the left screen, a complex spiderweb of lines and annotations. I'd identified a recurring pattern, a sequence of symbols that mirrored a minor linguistic anomaly I'd noted in the historian's personal journal, also recovered from the study. It was a long shot, a hunch born from years of chasing ghosts through fragmented data, but it was all I had. I fed the pattern into the analysis software. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, a flicker. Not just dates, but specific historically significant events, all converging on locations known for their ancient ruins or private collections. "Bingo!" I breathed, a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me. Simultaneously, the decryption software on the main monitor flashed green. A directory structure bloomed, revealing files named with cryptic acronyms. I clicked on the largest, an archive labeled LGCY. My eyes scanned the lines, picking out keywords. It referred not just to a collection, but to an ideology, a hidden purpose. The files spoke of safeguarding, of preserving, of influencing. They weren't just acquiring artifacts. They were actively shaping their historical context, controlling their very existence. The financial records were staggering, detailing transactions worth hundreds of millions, funneled through shell corporations and offshore accounts. The correspondence mentioned discrete acquisitions from private estates, clandestine meetings in European capitals, and the manipulation of archaeological digs. It wasn't about forgery, not entirely. It was about control. Control over what was seen, what was known, what was believed. "Seth, what is it?" the colleague asked, his voice tighter now, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "These aren't just wealthy collectors," I said, my voice low, a tremor of disbelief in its undertone. "This is a vast network. Centuries, it looks like. They're not just trading illicit artifacts. They're orchestrating the manipulation of historical narratives. They're deciding which parts of the past survive and which are buried." The files painted a grim picture. They detailed how genuine artifacts, priceless and historically vital, were acquired, then either hidden away, their existence denied, or subtly altered to fit a revised timeline, a convenient history. Other documents outlined strategies for discrediting dissenting scholars, for funding specific research that aligned with their agenda, for quietly erasing inconvenient truths. The legacy wasn't just a collection of objects. It was a curated version of history, maintained by the keepers through deception and, I was now certain, violence. My gaze drifted back to the map, now dotted with glowing markers. Each marker represented a location where a legacy item had been either unearthed, acquired, or reportedly vanished. The estate where the historian had died was prominently marked, a nexus point. He hadn't just been a victim of a fall. He'd been a casualty in a war for truth, a war he was clearly on the verge of exposing. The air in the boardroom felt suddenly thinner, the weight of this revelation pressing down on me. This wasn't a simple murder investigation anymore. I had stumbled into something far grander, far more dangerous. A conspiracy that reached back through the annals of time, its tendrils wrapped around the very fabric of history. The files from the historian's study, detailing the systematic manipulation of historical records, still clawed at the edges of my thoughts, a dark current beneath the surface of my current objective. "The composition is unique," I stated, my voice cutting through the silence. "A blend of silicate minerals, trace elements specific to a very localized geological formation. It's not common. Not at all. Across from me, the head of the investigative unit, a woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing, leaned forward. "And you're certain this links to foul play?" Her skepticism was a familiar, unwelcome presence. "Certain enough to know it wasn't from the historian's shoe, nor the floor of his study, nor any reasonable source within that estate," I countered, tapping a stylus against the projection, highlighting the crystalline structures. This dust was transferred. It suggests the victim was elsewhere, or someone else was, carrying this specific particulate matter. My immediate goal wasn't to convince them of murder yet, but to secure the resources I needed. The files pointed to a vast, intricate network. It was about something far older, far more entrenched. "I need to speak with a retired curator," I announced, switching the projection to a grainy, decades-old photograph of an elderly man with a shock of white hair and piercing eyes. "Professor Elias Thorne. Thorne has been out of the academic loop for years, reclusive. Why him?" "Because the files I found mentioned a society," I explained, my gaze sweeping across the faces in the room. "A group dedicated to the preservation of true history, as they called it. But their methods involved suppression and alteration. Thorne, I suspect, knew about them. Perhaps even encountered them." It took another hour of insistent argument, of me laying out the circumstantial evidence, the inconsistencies in the scene, the sheer unlikelihood of the historian's fall before I secured permission. Not an official mandate, but a tacit acknowledgement that my reputation bought me a certain latitude. I was on my own, but with a green light to pursue my lead. The address I had for Professor Thorne led me to a small, unassuming cottage nestled on the outskirts of the city, its garden overgrown with a chaotic beauty. The air here was damp, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing a sliver of a face, framed by the familiar white hair from the photograph. His eyes, though clouded with age, still held a spark of their former intensity. "Professor Thorne?" I asked, holding up my identification. "My name is Seth. I'm an anthropologist. I'm investigating the death of your former student, the historian." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something fear passing through them. He hesitated, then grudgingly opened the door wider, allowing me into a cramped, book-lined living room. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Stacks of journals and ancient texts teetered precariously on every surface. "I heard," he said, his voice raspy. "A tragic accident, a great loss." He gestured to a worn armchair, then settled himself into another, his movements stiff. I got straight to it. "Professor, the circumstances of his death are unusual. I found some documents, references to a group called the Keepers." The name hung in the air, a palpable weight. Thorne flinched, his gaze darting to a dusty window. His hands, gnarled with age, gripped the arms of his chair. "A myth, Seth. A fanciful notion concocted by disgruntled academics." His denial was too quick, too emphatic. The documents detailed how they acquired genuine artifacts, suppressed findings, rewrote timelines. I pressed, watching his face intently. He sighed, a deep rattling sound. "They are not a myth. They are very real and very old. I encountered them in my youth during an excavation in the Levant. They intervened, quietly, subtly, but definitively. Their agents were everywhere. They control access to certain sites, certain finds. For political and financial gain, yes, but also for something else. To maintain a specific narrative of history, one that benefits them. The historian was getting close to something, wasn't he? I pushed, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. He was uncovering something they wanted to keep buried. Thorne nodded, his gaze fixed on a distant point. He spoke of a site, a private estate, remote, historically significant, believed to be built on top of an older pre-dynastic settlement. He believed it held evidence that contradicted the established historical record, evidence that the keepers had suppressed for centuries. A unique mineral signature, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Professor, can you tell me where this estate is located? He hesitated, a deep furrow appearing between his brows. It's known as Blackwood Manor, deep in the eastern hills, owned by a family with old money, deep ties to institutions. They've kept it private for generations. Blackwood Manor. I thought of the mineral dust, the precise anachronistic details. The historian hadn't just stumbled upon a conspiracy. He had walked directly into its heart. And the dust I found, the dust I held the spectral analysis of in my hands, had come from that very location. The link was undeniable. The tension in the room and within me ratcheted up another notch. The spectral analysis results, a cold, hard truth, sat in my hands. Blackwood Manor. The name resonated with a chilling finality, a signature that pointed directly to a specific remote mining operation known to be owned by Elias Thorne. The voice of my colleague, a sharp, unyielding analyst, crackled through the secure line. Definitely a match, Seth. The unique isotopic ratio of the manganese and chromium in your sample is identical to the geological survey data from Thorne's Kalin Ridge mine. No other known source matches this fingerprint. My grip tightened on the printout. Kalin Ridge. Thorne. The pieces, once scattered and disparate, were snapping into place with unnerving speed. Elias Thorne, the industrialist, the collector, the philanthropist. The facade was crumbling. Thank you, I managed, my voice steady despite the tremor in my gut. Keep this under wraps, every bit of it. You know I will. But Seth, this is big. Tread carefully. An understatement. Thorne's estate, a fortress nestled deep in the Kalin Ridge wilderness, was my next unavoidable step. I needed to see what he was protecting, what he was creating, and what he was hiding. The mineral dust wasn't just a clue. It was an invitation, a challenge, and I intended to accept. Hours later, under a sky-bruised purple with the last vestiges of twilight, I navigated the winding, unpaved road leading to Thorne's formidable compound. The estate wasn't just remote. It was isolated, a sprawling testament to wealth and a desire for absolute privacy. High walls, topped with glinting razor wire, snaked through the dense forest, punctuated by motion sensors I'd noted during my earlier reconnaissance. This wasn't just a home. It was a stronghold. I parked my rented vehicle several miles away, tucked into a thicket of pines, and proceeded on foot. My gear was minimal. A discreet toolkit, a small, high-powered flashlight, and my unfailing resolve. Years of sifting through ancient burial grounds, of dissecting crime scenes, had honed my observational skills to a razor's edge. I saw the subtle shift in the undergrowth, the glint of metal that wasn't natural, the faint disturbance in the pattern of the gravel. My infiltration point was a less guarded section near a service entrance, obscured by overgrown ivy and a stand of ancient oaks. I disarmed a pressure plate with a practiced hand, then bypassed a laser grid, the thin beams of light a silent, deadly web. The lock on the service door was robust, but not insurmountable. A few precise clicks, a soft thud, and I was inside, the metallic tang of industry immediately assaulting my senses. The air was heavy with the smell of clay, solvents, and something metallic, like freshly worked bronze. The sound grew louder, leading me to a large, open space. This wasn't a workshop. It was an industrial-scale operation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a stark glow on rows of workbenches. This was it, the forgery workshop. My eyes swept over the scene, absorbing every detail. Elaborate sculpting tools lay beside unfinished pieces, a half-carved sarcophagus lid, an intricately detailed cuneiform tablet awaiting its final aged patina. Vats of corrosive liquids bubbled gently, designed to accelerate the effects of centuries. Microscopes, far more powerful than any a legitimate archaeologist would use, sat beside trays of pigments, some synthetic, others clearly derived from rare, ancient sources. The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily breathless. These weren't crude fakes. They were masterpieces of deception, crafted with a level of precision that blurred the line between replication and creation. One workbench held a partially complete bronze dagger, its hilt adorned with familiar anachronistic carvings, the same style I'd noted on the artifact found near the historian's remains. A small, specialized abrasive tool caked with the distinctive manganese chromium dust lay beside it. It was undeniable. This was where the anomalies were born, where history was rewritten, and where the tools of murder were perhaps also shaped. I traced it to a section of wall disguised as a bookshelf, its spines meticulously arranged. My fingers brushed over a particular volume, and a small, almost inaudible click echoed in the vast room. The bookshelf swung inward, revealing a dimly lit passage. A vault. My breath hitched. The passage led to a heavy, reinforced steel door, its surface scarred with complex locking mechanisms. This wasn't for forgeries. This was for something far more valuable. With a surge of adrenaline, I set to work. The locks were intricate, but I'd studied enough historical security systems to understand the principles. The massive door swung open, revealing a cavernous space bathed in a soft, golden light emanating from carefully positioned display cases. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating what lay within. My jaw went slack. No forgeries here. This was a king's ransom in genuine antiquities. A pharaoh's funerary mask, its gold gleam muted by centuries, stared back at me. Intact Etruscan bronzes, their verdigris beautiful and true. Priceless Roman mosaics, their vibrant tesserae perfectly preserved. A collection of meticulously restored Greek amphorae. Each piece was authentic, clearly stolen from legitimate archaeological sites, meticulously cleaned, catalogued, and displayed with a reverence that felt perverse given their illicit origins. This was the true treasure, the stolen legacy Thorne was hoarding. As I took a step deeper into the vault, my foot brushed against something almost imperceptible on the floor. A low, rhythmic thrum vibrated through the air, growing in intensity. A high-pitched whine began, distant at first, then rapidly approaching. Red indicator lights, previously dormant, began to flash around the vault's perimeter. Thorne's advanced security systems. I'd triggered something. The steel vault door, which I had left slightly ajar, began to slowly, inexorably swing shut. An automated voice, calm and synthesized, boomed through hidden speakers. Intruder detected. I had mere seconds. I lunged forward, scrambling to get back through the narrowing gap, the heavy door groaning as it sealed itself. The air pressure shifted dramatically as I squeezed through, the metal edge brushing my jacket. I was out, but the passage behind me was now sealed. Alarms blared, a piercing shriek that echoed through the entire estate. Footsteps pounded in the distance, growing closer. I knew I had found the heart of Thorne's operation, but now I was trapped inside his beating chest. I was out. The last sliver of the heavy, corroded door scraped against my jacket, leaving a faint streak of rust on the sleeve as it slammed shut behind me with a final, echoing thud. The sudden silence was deafening after the groaning metal and the frantic scramble. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged sound in the confined space of the hidden passage. The air, thick with the scent of ancient dust and damp stone, felt heavy, pressing down on me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that threatened to drown out my thoughts. There was no time to process the near miss, no luxury for the adrenaline to dissipate. My mind, usually a calm, analytical machine, was a whirlwind of images. The narrowing gap, the glint of the closing mechanism, the sheer, bone-deep certainty that I was being watched, being played. I pushed the panic down, forcing it into a tight, cold knot in my gut. Survival first, then the reckoning. A swift, determined climb through a service shaft, a route I'd mentally mapped during my initial, less restricted sweeps of the estate, brought me to an emergency exit. The cool night air hit me with a jolt, cleansing the musty scent from my lungs. I didn't hesitate. My phone, clutched tight in my hand, was already dialing. Emergency, penthouse boardroom. Now. The journey across the city was a blur of flashing lights and the blare of a siren. I sat in the back of the unmarked vehicle, my eyes scanning the photos on my tablet, the digital evidence a stark counterpoint to the raw, visceral reality of what I'd just experienced. Each pixel held a fragment of the truth, waiting for me to piece it together. The city lights glittered below, a dizzying tapestry of indifference. The air conditioning hummed, a sterile counterpoint to the lingering damp earth smell clinging to my clothes. Two senior investigators, their faces grim, sat at the polished mahogany table, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. A uniformed officer stood by the door, impassive. I knew I had a limited window, a narrow aperture of attention before their preconceived notions hardened into impenetrable walls. I didn't waste a second on pleasantries. My voice, though strained, was steady. Finch's death was no accident. It was a meticulously staged murder. I can prove it. I projected the first image onto the large screen. A high-resolution shot of the base of Finch's skull taken during the initial examination. The initial report attributed this fracture pattern to impact with the irregular stonework at the base of the precipice, consistent with a fall. I zoomed in, highlighting a minute, almost imperceptible detail. But look closer. This isn't just a random abrasion. This is a pattern. A faint, almost ghost-like impression, consistent with a specific type of metalworking tool, an anachronistic tool. I flicked to the next slide. A photograph I had taken hours earlier, deep within Thorne's hidden collection. It was a close-up of a ceremonial bronze implement, its handle intricately carved, its blunt end bearing a distinctive, almost identical pattern of raised and recessed metal. The silence in the boardroom stretched, taut and brittle. This artifact, I continued, is from Thorne's private, uncatalogued collection. A collection that contains objects far older and far more dangerous than anything he declared. The pattern on Finch's skull matches this implement precisely. Next, a microphotograph of a singular, unusual fiber, isolated from the cuff of Finch's tweed jacket. This fiber, a blend of linen and a specific type of goat hair, is exceedingly rare. It's not found in any modern textiles. However, I paused, letting the implication hang. It is present in the ancient tapestries adorning the walls of the hidden chambers beneath Thorne's estate. Chambers I accessed just hours ago. I displayed a cross-section of the fiber alongside a magnified image of the tapestry's weave. The match was undeniable. Finch was in those chambers. He struggled there. This fiber, transferred during a close-quarters altercation, is proof. My gaze swept across the faces of the investigators. They were no longer skeptical, but grimly attentive. Their initial dismissiveness had evaporated, replaced by a growing unease. I pressed on, laying out the timeline, the geological inconsistencies of the soil found on Finch's shoes versus the soil at the base of the cliff. I explained, drawing a breath, the words tasting like ash. It's about a legacy. Finch was uncovering it. Thorne, as a prominent historian and keeper of these secrets, was at the center of it. The symbol of the keepers. This isn't circumstantial, I stated, my voice gaining strength, echoing in the polished room. This is an unassailable forensic case. Thorne murdered Finch. He orchestrated the fall. And he's part of something far larger, far more insidious than any of us imagined. The lead investigator, a man with tired eyes and a reputation for being unyielding, leaned forward. You're saying Thorne himself? I'm saying the evidence points directly to him, I confirmed, meeting his gaze. and to the fact that others are involved. Others who would go to great lengths to keep these secrets buried. I looked out at the glittering city, a silent testament to the hidden battles fought beneath its veneer of order. My life, I knew, was no longer my own. I had uncovered too much. The police force, compromised or not, was my only avenue now. I had to make them believe, make them act. My own survival depended on it, but more importantly, so did the truth. The game had shifted. The hunter was now the hunted, and I was about to walk into the lion's den, armed with nothing but facts and a grim determination. Finch's death, and perhaps about the stability of certain institutions. The chief investigator, a man whose face was a roadmap of past cases, leaned back, his eyes unblinking. Beside him, the district attorney tapped a pen against a pristine notepad, a gesture of impatience. A senior officer, rigid in his uniform, simply stared. They were waiting for me to falter, to show the strain of the past weeks. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I clicked the remote, projecting a high-resolution image onto the screen. A microscopic view of the soil sample from the manor grounds, specifically from the area beneath the precipice where Dr. Finch had supposedly fallen. This isn't merely local soil, I explained, pointing to distinct mineral inclusions. These trace elements are unique to a specific region in the Middle East, a region known for its ancient burial sites and, more recently, for illicit excavations. The district attorney stopped tapping. And how does a handful of dirt prove foul play? Dr. Seth? Because, I countered, advancing to the next slide, a comparison image. These same elements were found embedded in the sole of Dr. Finch's boots, deeper than superficial contact, suggesting he was dragged across such terrain, or at least had been in direct sustained contact with it prior to his death, and certainly not where he was found. I moved through the evidence methodically. The anachronistic textile fibers, too fine and too specific to be accidental, found beneath Dr. Finch's fingernails. A struggle, not a fall. The precise fracture pattern on the skull, inconsistent with a simple impact, but rather with a targeted blow from a blunt, historically specific object. A ceremonial mace, its design matching one Thorne was known to possess. I showed them the digital reconstruction, the physics of the impact, the sheer improbability of the tragic accident narrative. And then there are these, I said, displaying images of minute fragments, almost dust, recovered from Dr. Finch's clothing. These are slivers of a particular type of clay, fired at an unusual temperature, consistent with ancient Mesopotamian pottery. Pottery that, by all accounts, should have been in the archives of the National Museum, not scattered on a remote estate. The chief investigator finally spoke, his voice low. Thorne's influence runs deep, Seth. Are you suggesting he was personally involved? I'm suggesting he orchestrated it, I corrected, my gaze unwavering. Dr. Finch was close to exposing Thorne's true operation. The Keepers. Not just a society of historians. A clandestine network facilitating the trade of stolen antiquities, manipulating historical narratives, silencing anyone who threatened their carefully constructed legacy. I brought up the final, most damning piece of evidence. This was recovered from a hidden partition within Dr. Finch's personal data drive, encrypted with a cipher I spent 3 sleepless nights breaking. On the screen, a ledger appeared, rows of coded entries detailing transactions, dates, and locations. But it wasn't the coded entries that mattered. Not yet. It was the last entry, highlighted in red. And this, gentlemen, is the discovery that sealed Dr. Finch's fate. I zoomed in. It was a digital photograph, dated 2 days before Dr. Finch's supposed fall. The image was grainy, taken covertly but clear enough. It showed Thorne, unmistakable, standing in a cavernous underground bunker. Around him, crates were stacked high, filled with artifacts, some clearly recognizable from museum records as lost or destroyed. And in Thorne's hand, he held the ceremonial mace, its distinctive head gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. But that wasn't the crucial detail. The crucial detail was the individual standing next to Thorne, a shadowy figure whose face was obscured, but whose distinctive, ornate signet ring, caught in a glint of light, was identical to the one worn by the senior officer sitting across from me. A sudden, sharp intake of breath from the district attorney. The senior officer's face, previously impassive, drained of all color. His hand instinctively went to his own ring, a heavy gold band with a crest I now recognized. The room went silent, save for the hum of the projector. Is this what I think it is, Seth? It's a photograph of Thorne with a stolen collection taken by Dr. Finch, linking him undeniably to the keepers and the illicit trade, I explained, my voice cutting through the sudden, thick tension. And the man next to him, Chief, with the identical signet ring? Well, you can draw your own conclusions. The senior officer pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly. This is absurd. A fabrication, I demand. You demand nothing, the chief investigator interrupted, his voice like flint. He stood, his gaze fixed on the senior officer, then swept to me. Seth, you have just provided the evidence we needed. Thorne's influence might be vast, but this is irrefutable. He turned to the district attorney. Get a warrant, immediate, for Thorne, and for anyone else implicated in this image. He then looked at me, a grim determination hardening his features. You're coming with us, Seth. The glint in the chief investigator's eyes wasn't just agreement. It was a recognition of the danger I had courted. I had lit the fuse. The explosion was imminent. Thorne wouldn't go quietly. And I was now standing directly in the blast radius. The chief investigator sat across the vast table, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, a stack of freshly printed reports before him. A junior officer, pale and fidgety, stood by the massive screen displaying a rolling newsfeed, Thorne's face haggard and defiant, flashing across it in a mugshot. My own hands, clasped tight on the cool surface, felt strangely numb. The adrenaline had receded, leaving behind a profound emptiness, a hollow echo of the past few weeks. The fuse had indeed been lit. The explosion, as I'd predicted, was deafening. Thorne's network is unraveling, the chief investigator stated, his voice low, almost a rumble. The initial raids hit hard. His inner circle, the ones involved in the acquisition and preservation of the artifacts, are being brought in. He tapped a report. The details you provided, the anachronistic tool marks, the specific soil contaminants, they were the key. Unassailable. I nodded, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. Unassailable. That was the language of truth, the bedrock of my profession. My forensic insights, once dismissed as obsessive minutiae, had been the crowbar that pried open Thorne's meticulously constructed edifice of lies. The scale of his operation, the sheer audacity of it, was still staggering. He hadn't just traded in history. He'd rewritten it, buried it, and profited from its desecration. The screen flickered to a live shot of a warehouse being raided. Uniformed officers moved through rows of crates, each one meticulously labeled, but instead of mundane goods, they contained sarcophagi, ancient scrolls, and fragments of what looked like a forgotten civilization's statuary. The breath caught in my throat. These weren't just objects. They were stories, stolen voices, now finally seeing the light of day. I recognized the distinct ochre pigment on a small, intricate carving, a signature of the culture whose existence Thorne had so vehemently denied. The artifacts, I murmured, my voice hoarse. Are they all accounted for? The chief investigator met my gaze. Not all, but a significant portion. Enough to prove the existence of the keepers, enough to expose the full scope of Thorne's illicit trade. The public is reacting. Reacting? I asked, leaning forward. Outrage, disbelief, and a growing fascination, he clarified, gesturing to another news headline. Ancient legacy unearthed. Historian's death exposes centuries-old conspiracy. The words hung in the air, a stark confirmation of the impossible truth I had pursued. A different kind of tension now filled the room, not the imminent threat of violence, but the heavy weight of consequence. The world was shifting on its axis, however subtly. Historians, archaeologists, and cultural heritage organizations would be reeling, then rallying. The implications were vast, extending far beyond Thorne's elegant estate. My mind drifted to the deceased historian, the first victim. His fall hadn't been tragic. It had been an execution, a silencing. I thought of the minute flecks of anachronistic pigment on his clothing, the specific fracture patterns on his skull, the telltale soil composition. Each detail, a silent scream for justice, had found its voice through me. There was a quiet satisfaction in that, a deep-seated validation of my life's work. But there was also an exhaustion that settled deep in my bones, a weariness born not just of sleepless nights, but of confronting such profound human venality. The cost of truth, I realized, was often measured in more than just time and effort. It demanded a piece of the investigator, too. The chief investigator stood, signaling the end of the emergency call. "Seth," he said, his tone softening slightly, "you've done extraordinary work. You've brought down an empire and exposed a conspiracy that will redefine our understanding of history." I pushed myself up, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders. "It was the science," I corrected him gently. "The science spoke. I just listened." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "Indeed. This kind of work, it changes you. Some people shy away from the precipice once they've looked over it. Others find their true calling there." His words resonated. The world I now knew was far more complex, more dangerous, and more deeply layered with hidden truths than I had ever imagined. The meticulous pursuit of justice through science, once a passion, now felt like a solemn duty, one that extended beyond the sterile confines of a laboratory or the quiet solemnity of an excavation site. It belonged, in some profound way, to the relentless pursuit of justice.